you hope.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming back for the afternoon session. As you can see, we have the biggest challenge of the day because we have to fill 2/3 of this white sheet. Oh, the morning session only filled 1/3, so my 4 distinguished guests have to fill the other 2/3 of the sheet. Okay, first question. Big Neil, Little Rob, any questions for them in terms of the case study? He's hiding, as if he's hiding down the back. Any questions in terms of the case study? Clarifications? I have 2 questions. Okay. Yeah. First question: the people in this business, do we know what their objective is or what their goal is? Okay, that's my first question. And second question is, what's the prize for the competition?
Okay. The second question can be answered by our distinguished Aussie, James Walker.
And James, yeah.
The first question, I think, ultimately, to pass this business on, but to who? Not entirely sure at the moment. So this is about passing this on, but being fair to all of the siblings. Okay. That's the objective.
Okay, that's the objective for me of the succession piece, but of the overall business, is there do they want to be profitable? Do they want to?
They want to farm.
They want to farm.
Yep. Fair point, Rob?
Yeah, I think probably give him the microphone there just in case.
I think we're probably looking at it from the view that one of the children wants to run a profitable farming business, and maybe some of the others aren't quite as profit focused.
Okay. Ed, question. I knew we'd get someone.
Is there any pension facilities for the parents? Or is the farm got to be the parents' pension?
Yeah. Okay, the future income, I suppose, for the parents or the landowners as they are at the moment, is there pension facilities in place, or do they need a return from the farm in the future?
There's going to be a little teeny-weeny typical put 50 quid a month in an NFU mutual pot that's going to give them about £3.75 a week on top of their standard state pension. It was taken out. It was taken out when mum and dad were 21, and it still goes on. Nobody ever changes it. Yeah. So nothing substantial.
Yeah. Right. So that very quickly focuses. Next question. Yeah.
Do we know which milk they produce from forage? Because I think milk from forage is a key driver.
Oh, you're getting too excited there about technical stuff. No, I'm a bank manager. I don't do technical stuff.
I presume we'll say industry average 2,000 litres or something like that from forage.
Yeah. I mean, what you could do. So we did talk about, do we put technicals into this and all of those, but we kind of shied away from that because my worry was, we could get really focused on technical performance, but clearly there are technical issues. But I think if you just looked at it, as Jack says, it's an average. It's performing as an average family unit. So if you took kind of average figures that they're doing around about that, then I think that would be a fair assessment.
Next question.
Who are the owners or partners in the business?
Who are the owners or partners in the business?
So owners are mother and father, Robert and Heather. Partners in the business are Robert and Heather. Children are nothing to do with the farm at the moment apart from working on it.
Slaves. Question up the front, yeah.
What level of income do the family expect to get from the farm? First question. The second question is, where does the cost of production need to be to compare with everybody else?
Okay, so 2 two very good questions, and they relate to my first one. What the level of income that's needed from this farm, and I suppose the cost of production piece. Little Rob is looking for the microphone here.
I don't know what the. I don't know if we had in mind what we thought was a level of income. You know, I often look at accounts, and actually most people take the same amount of money out generally across businesses. There's not much difference between it. Some people are very extravagant, some people live on nothing, but most people take about the same level of remuneration out. I think the key issue about what would they need to produce at to be competitive is probably a question that we'd like all you to answer. So we'll throw that one back to you.
Good man. Well done. Good.
I think in terms of when you look at the drawings levels, Graham, there's no great aspiration for them to be anything greater than that. Indeed, you know, they really hammer Rob every year because they don't want to pay any tax. I think as you see in there, they're quite happy to go away and buy a. Yep. Yep.
You need to have a figure in mind as to what's required.
Yeah.
You need to start paying out shares.
Correct.
Well, I think you can make, and I think you can make some assumptions round about certainly John coming back to the farm. He's come off a big salary in the city. Is he going to keep dawdling away for 8,000 or 9,000 quid a year? They're going to need their income is going to need to rise because of the pension situation and because of the next generation coming in. But you know, they don't have a target because they've not actually really sat and thought about it.
Okay, one more question here. Two more. Yeah, we'll take the lady first.
Obviously, the parents want it to be fair. Do the children expect it to be fair? And if that's the case, what do they see as fairness? Is it equal shares, or is it work, or?
I think there's an assumption in the children's part, certainly for two of them, that it's going to be fair. But you've got the lad that's just come home that probably doesn't want it to be particularly fair, as mum and dad would see it. You know, mum and dad would see, you know, it might not be third shares, but what they probably want to do is get the daughter set up in a house without a mortgage and all of these kind of things. So, you know, it's not necessarily going to be a three-way split. But, you know, I suppose the question back to you would be, you know, does it have to be fair? And, you know, what might that fairness bit look like in your mind? Because I think those are some of the things we're kind of looking for back, you know, in terms of, does it have to be, do you just say to them, well, actually, you know, you're not going to be involved in this farm business, all this farm, so off you go.
Tough living. Yeah, next question, and then I come to you.
And if you're satisfied with the potential successor as someone who can run the farm well, where would you go as bankers in terms of lending money into diverse dairy-type related activities? I'm thinking of the degree to which you would go into micro-dairy, the degree to which you would support retail, or would you really just be only comfortable doing the core dairy activity as a banker in terms of how you would, if you like, help the financial arrangement?
Yeah, okay. So that all comes down to the management. You know, do we judge? And we're not always going to get it right. We'll not get an argument on that point. Can we judge that the management of that business can do more than the core enterprise? You know, and I think there is a debate with this particular business whether they can do the core enterprise before they even think about stretching out. You know, banks, I'm not just going to talk about the one I work for, but banks generally will be supportive of that, but it will come down to getting confidence in the management that they can actually move away from the core business and not take their eye off the ball. Because in a lot of these diversification situations, somebody disappears off down a track, the core business gets forgotten, starts to go backwards, and then it, you know, it all just starts to cave in, and it's very, very dangerous. So yeah, you know, you need to be pretty sure that that's going to be, they're able to do it, and it's going to be done in a properly managed fashion. Rob, you get anything to add to that? Okay.
Question.
You tell us. You tell us. Sorry, the question was, what was John going to do with his £100,000? So that's a nasty wee one that the bank manager and the accountant threw in there just to get views on. You know, should he invest it? Does he keep it for himself? Does he go and buy? Does he go and invest in something different? If he is going to invest it, how does he invest it? You know, could do. Sorry, second. You were going to ask another question, Jeremy.
Oh, the other question was, have they thought of diversifying? Bed and breakfast?
Sorry, the question was, have they thought of diversifying, doing anything else? No, not at the moment. There you go.
Other people's money
Great.
generate some income.
Great start for the panel discussion, I would have thought there.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Neil and Rob, for participating so far and keeping the ball rolling. And to keep the ball rolling, I'm going to hand over here to our four guests this evening, and I'm going to ask them very quickly to, in one or two lines, describe first of all what they do and who they work with, and then maybe just pull out one highlight of the session this morning so far. So I'm asking them two tasks straight up, and then I want to get plenty of interaction because we have a big board to fill. But you know what they do, who they work for, and secondly, then I suppose in terms of their highlight for this morning and something that really needs to be teased out. I'll start at the very end of it, and we'll work our way across. Like we have the microphone. And
hello, I'm David Cook. I'm a director with Promar International. So I'm responsible for a team that does a lot of the international work that we do, as well as some of the project type work that we do. Some of that involves farming. A lot of it involves the supply chain. I work with the haves and I work with the have-nots. So I think that's been mentioned before. So that's just perhaps a little bit about me. You can ask lots of other things about me as we go forward, if you like. The thing that I think struck me is I think it was Alan that said it's all about the management. And we did a study in 2012 that looked at management ability and related that to profitability. So it's a little bit like a psychometric test that we did on around about 100 farmers. One of the questions was, how important is it for you to be seen as successful? And surprisingly enough, the farmers that actually felt that was very important made another £15,000 worth of profit. The guys that like to network, in terms of going to farm walks and that sort of thing, made another £20,000 in profit, and I guess that's why those of you that are farmers are here today. And those that benchmarked made another £10,000 in profit. I suppose one of the questions that I'd also like to sort of raise is, what do you do if you don't like benchmarking and you don't like networking? And there's a lot of farmers that actually don't, and I don't know whether the Kidworths are a family that don't like mixing, but they might be, but that's a bit of a challenge. Anyway, that's my...
Excellent, thank you very much, David. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm Steve Elwood. I've worked in the farming and the agri-food sector all of my career. I had 25 years at HSBC. I left them in 2008 because I saw the financial crisis coming. That's a lie, by the way. But I did leave them because I wanted to get closer to the action, and I saw myself much more comfortable in farming and food than in banking. And it's led me very fortuitously, really, to work on a number of boards, all privately owned, family businesses operating in agri-food, in potatoes, in poultry. Velcourt, some of you might know, is a broadacre farming company. I'm also Cumbrian, and I live in a village called Kibworth. But any of the similarities between me and the case study are purely coincidental. If I may, just one point, and this is like a little pet subject of mine, but with quite a few little references to decline in dairy farmer numbers. And I just want to make a philosophical observation, which is that if you go back 250 years, the agricultural revolution was what spurred the industrial revolution. And the fact that society gets fed by fewer and fewer farmers is a bloody good thing. You know, it really is. And whilst we expect farmers to look after the environment and the fewer numbers not to be out-muscled in an unfair way, I don't think that a reduction in numbers per se is a bad thing. Quite the reverse, I think it's a good thing. Exactly that. And then in terms of what came out of this, I guess investment really. So having read the case study, having looked on the board, having spent 30 or 40 years in the industry, You know, this is a business that's made very little investment other than in bits of shiny kit. And if the business wants to have a future, then one of the things it's got to get right as a business is what it wants to invest in and why.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. Pete?
Hi, I'm Peter Wasnich. I farm in partnership with my wife, Diana, down in the southwest of England. With dairy farmers, we run block carving type systems, whether they be spring or autumn, but they're all high foraged block carving type systems. As for this morning, what do I take out of it? There's masses you can take out of it, but it keeps coming back to the same things for me, that as an agricultural industry or as a dairy industry, we try not to, we try and think with something different other than a primary basic primary industry, and really we must be looking at things just like return on capital and what have you, and not trying to treat ourselves as something special. And there are huge complex issues, because not only is it just the farmers are involved, but also their families are involved as well, and their workplace also becomes their living room as well. So, and it creates huge emotive issues as well. But succession is obviously one of the things we're going to come on to, and basic financial business monitoring. But you know, I would really urge people to go back and just look at it as a business that we also live and work in as well.
What you're getting at, Pete, is the wrong benchmarks. We had a quick discussion over lunch in terms of, for example, here in the UK, I mean, margin over feed is probably one that's used on a lot of farms, whereas coming from Ireland, I mean, it's never used in terms of a farm walk or a situation like that. You know?
I think they're totally wasted, to be honest. If you're not costing the whole business as one, trying to look at something in isolation is totally meaningless.
Hi, my name is Drew Fox. I work at Alpha Capital Research. We're a U.S.-based investment advisor that really specializes in the alternative space. I suppose we're led into this field by just analyzing the risk-reward possibilities in agricultural commodities, and we think investors bring different opportunities to the farm than banks do.
Why would you want to invest in a farm that's making no money?
Well, I think you invest in the potential of an opportunity, and unfortunately, perhaps, agriculture's potential is usually defined in generational chunks, right? So once every 25 or 30 years, there's a major impulse to change. Maybe agriculture needs to be managed more like traditional businesses and have 5-year plans, 10-year plans. But the opportunity is definitely there at the capital expenditure and the generational level.
It's a relatively new concept for me, and would be for Irish farmers as well. I'm not sure how popular in the UK in terms of alternative financing of family-type farms. How popular is it, or how much banking?
So, just to set this straight, Jack, we're raising money for a fund that will lend money to farmers, and instead of extracting a principal and interest payment from farmers, the payments will be based on the price and yield of the crop, okay? This gives the investor an exposure he wants, okay, and is happy to carry.
Okay, any questions now? Jump up if you have questions. Are you all happy with that in terms of a concept, in terms of a principle, and feel that you can relate your yield and your...
This would be a normal model in America, I gather.
It's a yearly model in America, okay? There's something known as flexible cash crop leases in America. What we've done is institutionalize this into a multi-year model, which gives investors an interest in what's happening at the farm level.
So
but all types of farming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the investors are more investing in the ability of the farmer rather than the commodity then?
No, we're investing in the commodity. We're using national indices, okay? And one of the great things about farming, and you said it earlier, is that over time, prices tend to rise, and over time, yields tend to rise, and that's what the investor seeks to capture.
There's no guarantee of return.
Absolutely, none. Yeah.
I mean, you've got a lot going for you in the US. I'm not long back, and we talked about futures was mentioned this morning, and I mean, I walked in 3 weeks ago into this Wisconsin farm, and he had forward sold his milk from January to June next year. He had a margin protection scheme for a part of his produce. He had feed for 2 years in the bunker. He had a lot of he had a lot of risks boxed off in terms of protecting his business. Do they have a role? And I know one of the speakers this morning mentioned that maybe they don't have a massive role here, but do you feel that some of those protections, some of those futures have a role in the likes of the UK or Irish dairy industry?
I feel that they definitely do on the cost side of the equation for all farmers, and I don't see that happening in Ireland or here. I'm not so...
The cost side of the equation, you mean the inputs?
The inputs, yeah. Okay, grains, fuels, etc. I'm not sure that hedging forward a farm that has 200, 300 animals really makes sense right now.
But could we do it as a cooperative or as a
Exactly.
processor?
Yes.
Pete, what do you reckon of that in terms of that future piece, in terms of if you could sell forward your 6 months of production for the next 6 months of next year?
Yeah, obviously it gives you a certain guarantee in there. I wouldn't imagine many of these farmers would be selling forward all of their production, so they'd be just hedging their bets on some of it. And as individuals in this country, I'm not sure we'd be producing enough to be able to do that. But certainly on the feed things and stuff, many of us, as buying groups and stuff, are buying forward as far as it's sort of practically possible on the UK market at the moment. And I'm not sure if those timescales will actually get more distant as we get further into the market.
Yeah, I mean, a co-op is a great aggregator, or any group of individuals is a great aggregator. So that should be something that comes intrinsic with the co-op's job.
David, in terms of the compilation of figures, I mean, you probably have farmers that are using futures or not using futures or forward purchasing, etc. Any thoughts on that piece?
I think the key thing comes back to what people have said this morning, is to understand your cost of production. So it's a little bit like fixing your interest rate, for example. If you're looking at the sensitivity of it and you think the interest rate will go up and it's going to cause you severe financial difficulties, then why not fix and know that you can afford it, from the outset? And I guess that would be, if you understand your cost of production and you know what sensitivities these various inputs would have, then that might encourage you to perhaps, lock in at a price that you can afford rather than leave it to the open market.
Yeah, a couple of observations on futures, and I'll take it back to volatility, because usually people say we're going to be faced with more volatile times, therefore futures are the answer. And two observations, one of which is that if you've got a market where you have surplus and then shortages in terms of production and supply balance, then there will be volatility in prices. If you then put money speculators into that equation, that volatility will be greater, not less. So the fact of the market is that volatility is increased when you get non-producers and non-purchasers of products entering the marketplace. And so if you're going to outwit that, you've got to be pretty smart people. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't use them, but to simply say futures are the answer to volatility is a very dangerous remark.
And I'd say, I'm not sure, I mean, talk to me if there is, but I mean, a portion of the product is what I'd see happening in the US, that they're not putting lock, stock and barrel into it, a portion of the product, because they know their cost of production, they know they're high, and listen, let's lock in what we can just to survive the lull and be able to reap the benefits in the high.
Yeah, but what that is, that's forward selling, which is a different thing altogether. That's a different thing altogether.
But it's related to, it's futures. I mean, they're selling on the futures market over there in the US. They're ringing up the broker and they're ringing up Chicago Board of Trade, and it's been sold. That's what's happening, yeah. But Drew, do you agree with Steve now? I mean, he's kind of saying that, listen, one goes against the other, that you won't solve it. I mean, you'll want a return on your money, will you not?
Absolutely. I think probably the best way to look at it would be to just imagine yourself as a dairy farmer today, and imagine that there has been a 10-cent decline in the price of milk. Okay, you still owe your bank the original amount of money you borrowed to produce that milk. Okay, would it not be better if instead of having to pay back on that 10-cent drop completely, your cost of production dropped by 3 cents, okay? And that's what we're doing for you, right? And I think that's an important mechanism for a farmer.
What do you think of the concept, the alternative financing that goes up and down with the price of the product, or David?
Well, so this could be 100 or 200 or 300,000 euro loan. It doesn't have to be a large amount. But we obviously, as lenders, are looking for good generational or capital expenditure events that allow us to lend into a business we think is going to grow.
But if, for example, David's business, if it stays in a slump, if it's the dairy business and it stays in a slump for a number of years, I mean, does that prolong the repayment of the money?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
No.
So how do you get your money back? How do you?
Well, essentially, when an investor buys a future in the market, he's taking the same risk as he is with us, but with us, he has the potential upside in the yield as well.
Okay.
Okay, and two variables are better than one.
Pete, you're jumping?
To sell in the futures market, you need to know very closely what your costs of production are. And, you know, unfortunately, at the moment, with the dairy industry we've got in this country at the moment, people are working off accounts that are, historically, like our case model, are 6 or 8 months out of date anyway, let alone working on real-time finances. So the thought of trying to sell into futures for something that's 2 years down the line when they don't even know what their cost of production were 12 months previously sounds quite frightening to me, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if there's an opportunity today that works at today's prices, is what we tell people, okay, you're willing to do that. You're not willing to do that, or you're not willing to do that to the same extent the prices may change over time, okay? Our facility allows you to look at the opportunity now and say, I'm happy borrowing this amount of money, knowing that as the price falls, I pay less, knowing as the price rises, I pay more, okay? So it basically allows you to, it takes away some of the uncertainty about the decision of the capital expenditure. That's what we're trying to do.
Just on that, and then this is a wider question for the rest of the panel as well as you. When your fund is looking to lend or to invest in a farm business, and just touching on Pete's point there, what kind of level of financial literacy and sophistication are you looking for from that business? And then just as the wider question, are farmers in general, are we behind the curve in terms of where we are at looking at finances and understanding what our business is actually doing on a commercial level?
I suppose the second one first. We find that a lot of farmers are more producers than business managers. And that's a constant struggle in the farming business, and it doesn't just apply to dairy. Overall, we're looking to have to exact loans with the same underwriting standards that banks do.
Okay. Pete, farmers behind the curve in terms of monitoring. I think you've touched on it already. In terms of cost of production, like you talked about, do you feel that the industry as a whole is behind the curve?
Yeah, I would say that, to be fair. There are obviously many producers who are generally up with it very well, but certainly with a case of our case study here, you've got a set of accounts that include several enterprises in there, being it dairy, young stock, beef, etc. And until you can get a good handle on each of those contributions to those enterprises and break it down, you can't start making management decisions, because you could very easily chop out the one that, although it might be contributing the greatest amount to the pot, if it's costing you more than it's contributing, it's still the easiest one to knock out. So without having a detailed breakdown of those and having some comparisons to go by, you are shooting in the dark, I'm afraid.
Pete, I'll stay with you for a minute. In terms of your system of production, you mentioned it at the start, it's forage based. I mean, it would be, relatively unusual, say, for a UK, farmer to be, completely down the forage road, similar to what we suppose we are in Ireland. When did the light switch come on for you in terms of your system and in terms of that business?
I'm still waiting. It's warming up. It's warming up slowly. No, I think when I returned home, I wanted to come home to the family dairy farm probably in the same way that our model is here today. For us to have another family drawing from the farm, we had to go back and analyse the business fairly carefully. At the time, we were running beef, sheep, and dairy, and with financial costings being done detailed on each one, we soon identified that the dairy was our most profitable enterprise. Unfortunately, at that time, quotas were a major restriction on the business, and although it wasn't cost prohibitive to buy quota and expand, we had to do it by exploiting the most margin we could per litre of quota we bought basically. So, and that's where the system that we've developed came from.
So you've been very similar to a lot of Irish producers, we say that completely capped in terms of their production, and the focus has gone for the last number of years in terms of cost of production, in terms of efficiency, in terms of margin. It's one relic of the quota era in Ireland is that that has been the focus of a lot of our producers and a lot of our teachings. Steve and David, in terms of the question that Neil posed, I have a feeling you're going to say they're behind the curve, that farmers are behind the curve in terms of benchmarking. But in terms of solutions, then, where do you go to try and to bring the industry back up in terms of monitoring, in terms of benchmarking, in terms of jumping up that curve in terms of monitoring their cost of production?
Okay. It's not that difficult, really, is it? It's not that difficult, particularly on farms that haven't got so many enterprises. If you get 7 or 8 enterprises, it all gets a bit more complicated. But it's not that difficult. I guess one of the challenges I happened in the late 1990s. Mac Sharry sort of changed my thinking on what was happening. To start within HSBC, a thing called Spotlight, which was unit cost of production on specialist dairy farms, and it was very illuminating, but it fell for a lot of criticism, and the main criticism was that we were showing the buyers of milk what the cost of production were, and therefore it was a problem. And I genuinely accept that as an issue, if you know what I mean. If the industry, as it were, puts all its costs out in front, it gets very difficult to negotiate on price. But the fact of the matter is that as we stand, dairy farming and most agriculture is a cost taker rather than a price taker, rather than a price maker. And I think understanding is more important than any kind of false belief that you're negotiating on the back of those figures. So I'd just say it's not that difficult, and it's down to individual farmers to take responsibility, and there are more than enough people out there to help them with the maths if that's the only factor that's holding them back.
For me, it's so very true. We still have, even though we've in Ireland, we've come a long way from worrying about what Glanbia or Dairygold or any other processors are coming. It's still there, and we set up a farm in 2009, a greenfield farm, to try and get to the real know about the cost of expansion, etc. So pre-quotas, when it went, etc., and that kind of thing. And some of the farmers kept shouting at us, "You're setting up the farm to show us we can produce milk at 14, 15 cents a litre, But our objective, of course, was transparency and show it all there. So for the last 6 years, we've printed every single cost from that particular farm. And at the moment, because the farm is in terms of stage of development and in terms of paying down capital and paying down banks, our cost of production is 35, 36 cents a litre. It's a long way from 14 cents a litre that they were shouting about. So I think your words are very true. Transparency for the industry, for the business, is much more important than worrying about what the process is, because it's a different. Now we are in a slightly different market in terms of the ratio of fresh milk, I suppose, and exported product. The majority of ours is exported out of the country. But comments in terms of solutions on the benchmarking and the cost.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with what Steve says. It isn't actually that difficult. I think what happens is people try and make it even more difficult by imputing costs and putting rents in and all of that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the individual business. And, you know, if it's a simple dairy business, you know, you can literally take all the costs and divide by the litres. It's sort of that simple. If you want to compare to everybody else, then clearly you do need to make sure that you are doing it in the same way as everybody else is recording that information. The other thing I think we've got to be careful of is averages, because, you know, although we say what's the average cost of milk production, you know, I mean, I was talking to Rob Hitch earlier, and within the group that we look at, the difference between the top 25 and the bottom 25%, so that's not the extremes, that's the top 25, you know, is 8 pence per litre. So, you know, can you really talk about an average? Because, you know, you've got there one guy that might at the current milk price be making money, and another guy that's making huge losses. That's important. The other thing is, it isn't just about litres, because you might be the most efficient cost of production farm, but if you've only got a few litres, you might still not be making enough money. So the other way you can look at it as well is by working out how much money you actually need to make. And that's quite a simple formula. If you add up, you know, what do I need to live on? What do I need to invest to make my farm sustainable? And you know, what do I need to repay my loans, you know, my bank borrowing? Then you'll end up with a profit number. And, you know, the question is, are you making that profit number? Now, it doesn't matter how big or effective your business is. It's all based on, is it making enough? You know, are you making a surplus? You've got to remember the tax as well. That's assuming you are making a profit, but let's hope we are. That's the other way to look at it. So it's not just litres. And I think the other thing that Pete mentioned earlier is when he bought quota, you're talking about, well, that was your limiting factor, so I need to maximise the amount I can make out of quota. Well, quota's probably not quite so important. It might be that land is now the number one limiting factor. So perhaps we should be looking at how much can I make per acre or hectare of land. But again, that will vary with different businesses. Some people might say, well, it's cow places, because I can't invest in any more cow space. So lots of different ways of looking at it. But
But and over time, is that declining? You know, if it's just status quo, you know, in the main, it's probably declining. Isn't it fair to say? Yeah. But you're right. The ambition, the objectives, the goals. I mean, like, they're crucial. Like, I mean, they have to come up front and centre for the likes of the case study. I would think. But sure, what would I? Ambition. Do you agree? Ambition is key to. Go on, Pete. Jump at it. Like, yeah.
Ambition. Going back to the business one again, then it's quite all right for people to say what they want out of a business, but if it's wrong for them to focus on production or whatever they want and then expect at the other end to be a profit. You have to be focusing on the thing that you want to achieve, don't you? So you know, I think that's a really significant thing, because there are a lot of lifestyle type things out there who people don't want to push themselves anymore, which is perfectly all right. But it isn't correct if they're saying they want to be kept in that lifestyle and then have a profit to match, really. So you have to be quite clearly defined as to what your driving factors are, and that's why I think we ought to be as farming businesses, you know, looking for returns on investments rather than you know, some of the parameters that are being sent around us at the moment.
Yep. We get the microphone to you. And we just
roving mic coming.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've heard a lot this morning about, with the speakers, that farmers need to look at their enterprises as businesses. We've just heard Pete say that, you know, a generic statement, Pete, a lot of farmers don't understand their cost of production. Chris this morning talking about interpretation and being very finely balanced when you actually go to a farm and say, wake up and smell the coffee. How do the industry change the mindset? And that question to all of the panel, really, because unless we get people to be honest with themselves and really tackle some of these issues and break their businesses down into components and look at how we're going to, you know, improve, if they won't actually accept it or acknowledge it, we're going to have a big challenge. How do we change mindset?
Go on, Pete, kick us off in terms of mindset.
Small bits at a time, I think, is probably the answer to that, because, you know, it comes into so many complex issues in there, aren't there? The succession, which is just a huge, you know, minefield in itself. You've got the one son who's wanting to take over the farm. Inevitably, that's going to cause resentment from the other two, so it's almost a poison chalice that he's going to take on. He's going to, you know, looking at it's ironic that we're in the New Zealand house today, because, you know, obviously their business models are, you know, sons buy into the business, so there's none of this sibling rivalry as to where the assets have gone. The parents can then sell out of the business. That son is then empowered, or son or daughter, is then totally empowered within that business and can then make business decisions that aren't inhibited by what their parents are thinking. They can then use that asset of that farm to trade, to move on, to do whatever they want or borrow against. Whereas in, you know, unfortunately, historically in this country, the farm's given to perhaps the eldest son or one of the sons. He's resented by the rest of the family. He can't then probably trade with that farm in the way that he wants to trade, because he feels he has to keep it in the family to hand it on. It's just such a huge question, but yeah, exactly. And it's, you know, it's been in the family for years and all the rest of it, but, you know, succession planning has to be really high up there, as does, you know, educating in finances, possibly more than you know, some of the agricultural skills we've learned.
Pete, how are you dealing with it in your business, and what have you learned from your succession piece? Like, you know, what have you learned from so far?
Well, we've tried to, you know, address succession fairly early on, and you know, I've got a sister in the business and as well, so we're trying to do what's right for everybody in the business. And obviously that's not something you can just address and then put away. That has to be ongoing. So situations do change all the time through illnesses, divorce, whatever, you know, there are other things. So, you know, try to address what people want on an ongoing basis. So, yeah.
You want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just did, because I think the question was asked in quite an interesting way. How do we get these people to change their minds? And I'm a married man. Sometimes I'm a happily married man. I've got kids. I work in a big volunteer organisation. And I've learned over my life, you don't get other people to change their minds. They have to change it for themselves. However, to be slightly more practical and pragmatic, I'd also say that if I could change one thing as a little wish in farming businesses, it would be that all farming businesses spent some time thinking about what they want to do in the future. And I used to encapsulate this by saying management isn't something you do when it's too dark or too wet or you're too tired to do anything else. You know, and I think every farming business should set time away inside the working week, inside reasonable hours, to actually sit and to think and talk about these things. And that way they might change their minds for themselves.
Thanks. My name's Nick Tepp. I have the great good fortune of farming in the South Island of New Zealand, and we milk a few cows. But I began my dairy career milking 2 Welsh black house cows a long way up at Highland Glen. And when you have 2 cows, you give them names. Really just wanted to make a couple of points. Very sadly, I've got to go in a minute, and I think this has been brilliant, so well done to Robert and the organisers. First, to pick up on a point Steve made, I spent most of my career in the potato industry. In 1961, there were more than 70,000 farmers growing potatoes. There are now fewer than 2,500. You know, that's an industry that's restructured. Dairy industry isn't beginning yet. Drew and I were both at a conference earlier in the year in Ireland, a dairy conference, and there were a couple of things that struck me about it. One was the audience was an awful lot younger than me, which is unusual because usually English conferences are full of old men like me. The second was that they never talked about the price of milk. They spent the whole time talking about the cost of production. And the third thing was that subsidy wasn't mentioned. And eventually on the second day I asked a farmer from Dublin why subsidy hadn't been mentioned. And he said, well, that's just to pay the tax bill. Yeah, they're a profitable industry. And we've talked about, you asked the question jokingly about how do you get someone to invest in a farm that's not making any money. You don't. You get someone to invest in a farm that is making some money. And the third comment was I was in Munich on the 1st of September and just happened to coincide with the Bavarian response to low milk prices, which is to drive around Munich in a nearly new tractor and disrupt the traffic to persuade politicians to give you more money. The response in to turn around and say, how do I conserve cash in a low price environment until the price recovers? And you change your management practices to do so. And I think one of the challenges that we face in this country with the industry is understanding why we are not competitive at a global level, because broadly we're not. And there are lots of things that we can do to change that.
Nick, while you have the microphone, just in terms of New Zealand, and I mean, a lot of the growth in the industry there for the last number of years has been built on the rising capital value of land. And probably now we're beginning to see a bit of a slowdown on it. You know, will that change the New Zealand dairy industry, or can you see changes coming on?
The growth hasn't been built on the rising capital value of land. The growth has been built on being competitive and supplying markets. In the last 15 years, global demand, someone said it here first thing this morning, has increased by between 1.5% and 2% per annum for the last 15 years. The US output has grown at between 1.5% and 2% per annum over the last 15 years. They maintain market share. Australia's gone backwards. They're producing less milk now than they were 15 years ago. The EU is producing the same amount of milk as it was 15 years ago. New Zealand is producing 6 times more because it has just eaten everybody else's lunch. It has been competitive, it has maintained and grown market share to everybody else's disadvantage because they have been uncompetitive.
Now I'll argue back that the debt levels have increased substantially, and that they won't be able to pay their debt levels this year, and it's on the back of purchasing expensive land at $60,000, whatever.
Yeah, it's no different to most other industries. 80% of the debt is held by 20% of the farmers, and if your timing of borrowing is unfortunate, you get caught by a low price. But the other bit I should have said, the other point that the Kiwi farmer will do is go back and look at his business, reduce his cash. Having made the plan, he'll then go to his banker and say, how do you help me through this low price environment? Because you, Mr. Banker, don't want to take ownership of my farm, do you? Because they don't.
Good. Questions? Any more? Sorry, here we on the left.
Sorry, can I just we'll get the microphone for that.
I call on a large number of farmers in my day-to-day work as a dairy cow nutritionist, and the problem I'm seeing, and I'm wondering whether it may happen to our trial farm, is labour. The farmers want to manage, but they actually are crisis managing. They're getting up in the morning and doing all the basic chores. They don't have enough labour in the UK because it is a very large part of the cost of production. Whereas you go abroad to America, labour is cheaper, Russia labour is cheaper, China labour is cheaper. So the farmers have the chance to manage their farm. So is labour going to be a big hindrance to this farming family going forward?
Yeah. Okay, just is it a related question on the labour? Yeah, go for it. So, yeah.
Well, I think we haven't got as an industry, particularly the dairy industry, and I'm from the west coast in Lancashire, is that we've got an industry now that is developing, is changing. Generally, I think we accept that herd sizes are growing, but most people in the industry have had no leadership training. There's nothing wrong that we've got loads of people in this country who want work. There's plenty of good workers with good work ethic. What we haven't got, I would suggest, are enough managers who can manage people.
Staff management, people management, enough of workers. Drew, the US, you have a lot of labour, non-nationals, you name it. Do you see it? I mean, if it dropped out of the US system, or if it, do you see it as a restricting issue here, or does it have to be a restricting issue here in the UK and Ireland in terms of?
I don't think so. No, I mean I think that there's and I think Jack probably knows this as well as I do. For example, in Ireland, the lad that lives in County Cork and has the opportunity to farm 300 acres in Tipperary won't move to Tipperary. Okay, that's a cultural issue. I can't do anything about that, but. I think that living wage workers are available and willing for this industry. I don't think that's the defining problem.
So then we're on to the next level in terms of good practice, good training, managerial skills. Like, Pete, are we doing? Is the industry doing it good enough?
Isn't this coming about it from the wrong way? Surely we should be, creating an industry that can really reward guys that come in and do a good job for us, really. And it frustrates me to think that people are talking about bringing in the cheapest cost labour unit from foreign countries. And I frequently see guys on 30, 40 and even 50 grand a year for managing and running dairy units. And people perceived in the olden days that, in days gone past, that they would have to work ridiculously hard for that. And I think providing your systems are well focused and targeted, and you've got right levels of investment in right equipment, i.e. good milking parlours and good things that give you high areas of return, I don't actually see we have to have a particularly arduous, poor paid job, really. And I think it's a message that we really must get across to anybody that's prospectively looking to go into agriculture, that it's no longer a poorly paid industry with difficult jobs in it.
Steve, David, you want to comment on it in terms of the labour piece? Yeah.
I think that's a really key point, and it's something that I think has been, has been missing. I mean, myself, I manage a team of 18 people. I've been on lots of different courses relating to how you manage staff, and I don't think get it all right all the time. I guess I've been promoted into that position because I'm probably more able to do that than perhaps other people. I know other people I've met, I probably would never ever think about getting them to manage staff. I think it's slightly different in a farm because you're sort of potentially born into it, and you might end up with managing staff. If it's something that you're not predisposed to do, perhaps understanding that as a weakness or having some sort of element of training to work out, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what can you do better, I think is all part of it, and probably I think a much more important part going forwards.
Questions? Yeah, in the centre and then down the back. Yeah.
The question that someone made earlier about is land now the limiting resource, and a dairy farmer came back to me and said that in their case nitrates are the limiting resource. So in their case land is absolutely the factor. So my question is, what do the panel think the future aspects are going to be in terms of both the social impacts and the environmental impacts that we're going to have to think about as we expand or diversify or change our dairy farming practices?
Yeah. So the environment, will it become a bigger question? Will it be the restrictor rather than the land? Pete?
I'm sitting next to you. Obviously environment's going to be very important going forward. We are in this oversupply situation at the moment, so obviously people, all we can talk about is sort of almost reducing production to get back in. But it will become important again, really, and I think the way, it's really important for us to go forward is to get the balance right. And, people talk about, maize has had some bad press recently, and, and things seem to go in cycles, don't they? And I think, what's important for us is to demonstrate as farmers that we can actually produce to a very good or a high level, but actually maintain the environment at the same time. And yes, there will always be a conflict of the two, because one is naturally conflicting with the other in some ways. But I think as a farming industry, it's important that we can demonstrate that both can happily coexist together.
What will be the restrictor environment? Will it be artificial nitrogen? Will it be, what? Or will it be organic nitrogen levels? Or what will be the restrictor? What do you
land is ultimately becoming, very recently we've just had the introduction of AD plants in our area, which is underpinned agricultural rents and probably put them beyond where, agricultural rents want to be for agricultural purposes. So that's just redefining the market for us at home at the moment. But there will always be different influences in the market. Like we said before, it was quotas before. I wouldn't be surprised if obviously water and stuff is going to be an issue, not perhaps so much in this country, but certainly in some of the other big milk producing nations around the world, that we're seeing it all the time, and certainly in America and New Zealand and stuff, that water's becoming the limiting factor. And as sure as eggs and eggs, there is always going to be a limiting factor somewhere along the the production cycle.
David, do you want to comment on the environmental as a restrictor? Yeah.
And I think it will become more important, although I think, and it will depend on individual farmers. And I think it'd be interesting, really, are we talking about dairy farming across the UK, or are we talking about individual farms? Because I think, for example, even when you look at the case study, you can feel very sorry for the Kidwell family and think, well, well, let's see if we can give them a future. But then, having said that, it might not be for them. As far as the UK is concerned, it's a good place to produce milk. You could be, for example, if you look in the Netherlands, then you're probably going to struggle even more with the environment. Relatively speaking, in the UK, land is available. Land is relatively a bit cheaper than other land. Okay, France is a little bit cheaper than the UK, so it's still a good place. And clearly, some individuals will have real limitations on land. Again, there might be opportunities for people, if they're really keen on dairying, to go somewhere where the land is a little bit more available, or that sort of thing. So I think there are options and choices. But environment will become more important, and I think particularly driven by consumers as well.
Thank you very much. Tweet back to that farmer now and tell him he might be right and he might be wrong. Next question, yep.
Thanks, Jack. I've really got two questions I'd like to ask. The first question revolves around this morning's presentations. It's quite clear to see that today's issue is a demand and supply issue. There's too much milk in the world, there's too much milk in this country. With that in mind, my bank manager has always told me that cash is king, cash is king. We don't lend on collateral. You've got to show a cash surplus. We've also heard this morning that some people are being paid as little as 12 and 14 pence per litre for milk, and cost of production from some of the consultants we've heard from could be as high as 40 pence per litre. My question to the panel is, what does it take to go bust at dairy farming? Because surely we should be seeing a lot more restructuring happening at the moment, and we're not going to actually get out of this trough until some milk gets taken out of the system. My second question revolves really again around demand and supply. Retailers will probably give processors 3 days warning in terms of how much milk or dairy products they require on the shelf for the rest of the week. Dairy farmers need 3.5 years lead time to actually turn the tap on and off, and I think Chris Walkland this morning showed that with October levels increasing in the UK again, which means that we're not really responding to low prices here in the UK. So how do we join those two up? How do we join a very short lead time from retailers to a very long lead time on farm? Because there are a lot of heifers in the system that'll still keep producing milk over the next 12 months.
Yeah, okay. David, I'm looking at you in terms of the number cruncher, in terms of catch is king, cost of production. What does it take to go bust? We hear for a long time about the intensive industries in Denmark and Holland, and every cow is walking around with debt of 20,000 euros around her neck, but they're still surviving to an extent. I mean, this is the question. What does it take? How long will it take? How to kind of weed out?
It's not an
ambition. I'm also surprised in terms of the current crisis, in terms of some people's milk price, why people haven't made the decision themselves a little bit earlier. I guess it's dependent on when they think things might pick up, what they're looking at their asset value and thinking, perhaps will my asset value improve sufficient enough to sort of mitigate the trading losses that they must be making at the moment. I think it'd be quite a good question to perhaps pass to Steve, being a banker, but ex-banker. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely an ex-banker. But I think it's a serious question, and it doesn't have to be go bust. It just has to be packing, producing milk. I guess that's the key question. And clearly, land values and the reserve that there is behind many, but not all farming businesses. You know, there are tenant farming businesses, there are tenant dairy farming businesses that will be, as we speak, under enormous financial pressure, whether they're good or bad producers, actually. You know, so it's not as that, but the majority have got this big land bank behind them, which makes it easy for banks to be supportive and generous in the short term. And I think my view is that a period of low prices will impact upon who produces milk and who doesn't produce milk. It's probably not in the UK going to be about people going bust, but these pressures will, over a period of time, start to take their effect. We're looking at a business here that's making profits according to its accounts, but we know it's losing money, and it takes a little bit of time for that bit to fall through. It's more than 12 or 18 months, yes. I would definitely say that. I think one of the big issues that I got written down, maybe for later, Jack, I'm not trying to take us there now, is about alignment. And one of the issues for small businesses in a commodity market is that they can get very out of alignment with that. I work in the UK poultry sector, huge amounts of capital tied up in that, and it is genuinely inconceivable that supply and demand could get so far out of line. And I know there's less to do with seasons, less to do with how much forage is around, etc., etc. But it is inconceivable because the line between the producer and the processor stroke retailer is more direct and more straightforward. And so I use the word alignment directly because there's all sorts of bits in between those two steps. But that's one of the big issues, I think, for UK farming at the moment.
3 days versus the 3.5 years. Does someone want to comment in terms of it's another form of alignment? It's maybe is it that contract piece in terms of the retailers, like they can say stop at 3 days. This is your point. I mean, it takes a dairy farmer a lot more to build up the resources to produce that milk. Drew, would you come in on that one? I think it's.
Can I just make one small point, and that is that the Kidworth family is blessed with a great plot of land, okay, around which they can sort a lot of problems, okay. So for me, the family problem is the first problem, and the family is fortunate to have this piece of land. So they could make a very clear break between the business and the family, where the family leases out the farm to a son, a daughter, or a third party. And I would imagine that a lot of the people that are in that situation right now, because of the price of milk, will be having to make those decisions. And they're not bad decisions. They're good solutions to a really bad problem.
Yeah, the flexibility. Yeah, come in. Yeah.
Just on turning the taps on and off.
Yeah.
I know from some of those, lots of businesses across dairy businesses, but particularly the large businesses, you can fill a wagon load of 35 heifers from France, Germany, Holland, Ireland at any time. And I predict it might get more difficult at periods, but you can fill wagons, you can have the taps turned on within a week or two at any point. And I would suggest they're probably being reared at a lower cost than you can produce them in the UK. So that's your tap on and off issue.
Okay. I had another question. Yeah. And then I come. Yeah. He's still there.
On the succession thing, what part does tax play? I know Pete mentioned about New Zealand, and there's obviously different tax implications in New Zealand to what there are in the UK. Passing land down to generations. What part does tax play in the succession thing, do you think?
Yeah.
I'm not a UK citizen or expert, but I mean, I'm sure that agricultural shares are part of the agricultural relief program here. And it is very conceivable that the couple could make a decision to pass on shares as opposed to specific pieces of land.
Rob, do you want to comment on that or no? Yeah. So that's the relationship then you're looking at in terms of, in Ireland, the Department of Finance relationship with farmers. And I would say in Ireland there's quite a strong link between not just farmers but other sectors as well, in terms of what they want and what they see as being successful to driving the business forward. Good point. Yeah, Dave?
I was just going to comment in terms of this case study. I think if it was me, what I'd be encouraging Rob and Heather to do is to actually think very, exactly now what they want to do and have that family meeting now. I think the oldest son, I can't remember his name.
You're not going to win the prize now if you tell everyone else. You know that they're all going to write it down. So
well, if you could reference me in your response, that would be great. You don't want me to tell the answer?
No, that's okay, that's fine. Another question here, yeah? Sorry, two questions. Yeah.
Thanks. One of the issues, as I see it, I may have got it wrong, in the dairy industry here, is probably the lack of communication between farmers and processors. And I know you're not all, you might not all agree with me, but I guess the question I have is, how do we improve that? In terms of, historically, I guess farmers have been increasing production without probably discussion with milk buyers, and actually farmers also don't know what the plans of milk buyers are going forward. I know Chris mentioned at the beginning, there have been developments and innovations at processor level, and there's been some improvement on communications back and forth. But I think there is, from my knowledge, and I've worked at the NFU for the last year, there is a lack of trust back and forth there still. And then I want to touch the thorny issue that Chris also touched on earlier on in terms of the haves and the have-nots. Obviously, we've had the review of the Tesco TSDG announced this week, it's conference on Thursday. What is the panel's view on aligned contracts in the UK, and do they have a place in the future? Thank you.
Two questions, and I come to the question beside you then. Relationships between the processors and farmers.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. You want it all, Drew, yeah? Yeah. Success, it means success for you.
Anything that gives the farmer a guaranteed margin is a good thing. So that should be encouraged. I mean, it can't be to the extent it destroys price signals in the market, because then, all of a sudden you have a business with Tesco and the next day you don't. But anything that gives a margin is a good thing.
Pete?
I'm very jealous that I haven't got an aligned contract. No, we're strong members of ALA. We believe very strongly in the having our own strong branded models, so that's really good. And I think ALA are giving us strong messages as to what they want, as in quality, and they're really after high constituents milk and stuff. And so we're trying, to do what they're wanting. I would quite agree that communication, and it isn't just inter-family communication or with the bank communication, as farmers, as an industry, sometimes or quite often, with accountants is another classic. A lot of farmers will begrudgingly have a once-a-year meeting with an accountant, really, and they really should be a part of your inner circle, if you like. You should be running ideas past them and stuff. So. But yeah, with milk buyers, they there should be constant dialogue with them. So definitely.
In terms of the aligned, while you have the microphone, I know you're jealous, but what do you feel about them? Aligned contracts?
Ultimately, I'm not convinced by them. If I'm honest, I'd like to see a strong industry throughout the whole country, really, and obviously. The different types of milk buyers out there, particularly in a country that is split between liquid manufacturing and processing, will be wanting very different profiles of milk and constituents. So, that it's a difficult one to actually get correct.
And it ripples down through the industry in terms of, for example, investment. So you'll have the haves that have the contract, have the aligned. They want to make the investment because they want to make sure that the business is making a profit. They'll still get their aligned contract. Whereas in Ireland, because we are all down the one tunnel, rightly or wrongly, the processors and the farmers together decided to invest. And someone mentioned this morning, £250 million, I think, in terms of investment. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've spent €600 million in terms of increasing the processing capacity. So as an industry, we've decided, listen, the peak is a problem, yeah, for that period of time. Let's up it, but we're willing to keep the industry on the track that it is because it's profitable for the farmers going forward, and that moves up the chain. Question beside you, then I come to the front.
Yeah, sure. Nearly my question. The thoughts about concentrating on one side of the accounts. Everybody's so focused on cost, and nobody's sort of thinking so much about the income. Chris highlighted earlier on that you know, the haves, the supermarket contracts, those with a relationship with their retailer, their processor along the chain are actually doing better. Is that not the way forward for the industry? I think we've been banging on about costs, and I don't want to dismiss it as irrelevant. I've heard Alan speak about cost of production umpteen times, and it get a bit frustrated. And I think back 15 years ago when I listened to his boss, who was sitting on the panel, speak, and this was the time just after foot and mouth. I was wondering whether to reinvest my hard-earned compensation from the foot and mouth cull back into dairying. And to quote Alan, to quote you, you said, if you're going to produce a commodity, you need 2 thoughts in a day. The first thought, first thing in the morning, is how do I cut cost out of my business today? And the second thought, when you go to bed at night, how do I cut cost out of my business tomorrow? Well, we've had 15 years, that's about 5,500 days, so that's about 11,000 thoughts that the dairy industry has had since you said that, and we still haven't got down to the cost that New Zealand are doing. So I wonder whether we should be basing our industry on our good domestic market and driving that and getting good relationships rather than trying to target a very, very, very low cost of production.
Yeah. Okay.
Just very quickly on that one. Ultimately, yes, we should be trying to market our milk for as much as we possibly can. But at the same time, the cost of production is something that we can directly involve ourselves immediately on our farm. And there are things that we can do on a daily basis which influence that, which with the milk selling side of things, you know, we try our hardest to influence that, but that isn't as things that we can do on a daily basis.
Yeah, come in, Steve. Yeah. Now you can influence the you can influence the output side of it with better solids and whatever. You know, I mean, you're not getting a peach. You discussed it with me, like, you know, you think you can't, like, no. Sorry? Yeah, you in terms of you can influence the output. You said in terms of costs you have control over, and I agree. But I mean, you can influence the output by better fat and protein percentages and better quality milk and you know, lower SECs. Yeah, you're happy with that? Yeah, yeah. Steve, sorry.
Just write a reply, but actually, you remember that much better than I do. So those were definitely my words. I'd stick by them today with one. Yeah, 11,000 times. The only slight twist on that is it's not total costs. It is costs per unit, if you know what I mean. So it doesn't mean everybody's got to cut back on what they're doing, because I think that's exactly the mindset that will lead businesses into trouble over the long term. Maybe not over the short term. We'll get back to the case study later. Just the big point, like, and you shouldn't really raise an idea without at least having a rough idea where you're going to go in terms of a solution. But I'd say one of the biggest challenges at the industry level now is that we have a liquid milk market, which generally speaking has shown itself to provide better prices, better levels of return for those that can enjoy it. We have a cheese market, which is somebody else's, broadly speaking, and then we are looking at skim milk and whole milk powder as our future. So we're actually going from the highest price output for our product to, I would suggest, the lowest price. And one of the challenges is, you know, what we can do about that big lump in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, you could categorize it like that. I mean, you could say that the powder market, you know, can be cut into the high-value infant powders, the low-value skims and whatever, you know, so that you can try, if that is the strategy decision of the processor or whatever, that powders are it. And in Ireland, our guys are pretty much saying that powders is where we're going, and we're going to export it onto the world market, you know, and make it as high value as we can. Now, I had a couple of questions. Was up here front? Yeah, sorry, this man, and then I come to David, and then I go back.
Hello. Does the panel think that the milk contract at Kidworth Farm is a risk or an opportunity or a limiting factor?
This is the man that's doing the case study now as we sit down. In terms of the contract on the farm, is it a risk? Is it a limiting factor? Is it an opportunity? Neil, just in terms of the contract, what A and B pricing, commodity-based contract.
Sorry, could we just ask Neil what the contract is? We've all read the brief, by the way, very carefully, but we've just forgotten.
Subject to A and B pricing.
Yeah. But you're not telling us how much now is in A or B, no?
No.
No.
Let's go. Let's 90-10, 80-20. You know, something in about there.
I mean, I think the important aspect is for them really to understand what their contract is. You know, I think it was William Neville this morning said that they did an analysis on one of the milk buyers and found there was a 3p difference between you know, people getting the lower price and the upper price. So I think it's important to understand. I mean, clearly, if there's with the B litres, obviously depends what the price is, but you know, I would be discouraged to produce B litres personally. You know, although you might say, well, okay, they're spreading them across the whole business. You know, I think you know, you've got to take those additional litres and understand how much those additional litres cost to produce. And you know, that either means that you know you have less cows as a result, or you know, you reduce your cost of production, or you reduce your output per cow. So again, that's a debate that needs to happen depending on the financials, I guess. So that would be my thoughts. I mean, one thing to bear in mind, I think, and Dairyco did some research. I think it was a couple of years ago, and you know, in terms of farm profitability, you know, milk price. I know it sounds difficult saying this at the moment, but you know, milk price isn't the key driver. You know, there's people with high milk prices that aren't making as much money as those people with lower milk prices. So, you know, it is important to understand that. I know at the moment there's people that there's no way they can make money on the level they're getting, but just bear that in mind.
Okay. I'll go back here, Neil. So you yeah.
I think I'll just come back to the point that was made there about the price and some firms. I think there'll be some people on the line contracts today. There'll be some of the most inefficient farmers we've got in the UK, and there'll be some guys that have, through no fault of their own, have ended up in pretty grim places. Will be the most efficient producers we've got in the UK, and I think necessity will drive that. Going back to milk price and what was commented on about butter and powder, the correlation between milks, whether it's liquid, cheese, powder, the market is so fluid that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis that people are offloading cheese milk into powder, vice versa. It's whatever the return, it's moving through Europe so quick. There's not even a lag between New Zealand and Europe. We're down to days. It's so fast. Go to the States, look what they've got. The correlation between milk types, it's almost irrelevant. And I think going forward, take the aligned contracts, which, for the record, I don't think they might benefit the few farmers. They haven't benefited the industry. But the correlation in milk types, I think we're all going to end up in a very, very similar place.
You're saying get real, we're playing on the global market. Is that what I mean?
Yeah, because it's one pulls the other. You know, as butter and powder is driving the market, it drags the price down, it drags the price. So when we see the high liquid milk prices, look at the graph, the correlation, it's there. You might get slight variances.
Yeah. Okay. Another question over here to your left, right. Yeah. Thank you.
Looking at the project here, there's the two sons, and if for argument's sake they were all divided up a lump sum of money, and one of them decided to go off and farm somewhere else, he hasn't got a proven track record, but he's a young, driven farmer. Right. How is he going to get into the business? Because at the moment every door is shut on anyone joining the industry. So these are the people we want in the industry of the future, the driven ones. Are they just going to go abroad and go to Ireland, go to New Zealand to do it, or is there going to be a place for them in British dairy farming?
Okay. No, we're not taking them in Ireland. We have enough of them. Young farmer, they're not coming with the milk. They're not coming. Chris is sending us over milk, so we're not going to take them as well. Young dairy farmers, the industry. We need young blood in the industry. The case study. There's one person, maybe one young farmer staying at home. Where does he go in terms of creating a business for himself if he wants to stay in dairy farming? True.
Well, to me, I mean, maybe he just has to wait.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, maybe it's just not the right time. Maybe vegetables or tomatoes or something else is right for 2 or 3 years till the industry shakes out. I mean, he should just go into it because he thinks he's good at it. He should go into it because he thinks he can make money. And if he can't, he shouldn't.
There are several ways into the industry these days. We're increasingly seeing contract farming schemes, profit shares. Historically, it's either been a tenancy or a buy, but there are becoming far more inventive ways out there to enter the industry. And obviously, as land values and stuff increase, it is becoming increasingly prohibitive for guys to almost get on that ladder in the mainstream sort of buying sense. But there are a lot of opportunities out there with new types of joint ventures.
I just wanted to mention my experience, the work that we've been doing with the Future Farmer Foundation, which is funded by Tesco. And I mean, what is apparent is there are some fantastic young people that want to get involved in farming. And by looking at a group like that, so there's 50 of them that come on each year, not all from farming backgrounds. So I don't think we just assume if someone's in a farming background that they need to go into farming. I think that those guys, given the right opportunity and the right encouragement from all of us, and that isn't a case of saying, you know, you can't do it like that because you've never done it like that. The real encouragement for some of these young people, I think they'll make fantastic farmers for the future. We've actually got one of the Future Farmer Foundation from people here, actually, in terms of Joe here, who's sitting to my right. You know, so again, encouraging people to participate in schemes like that. I think the ones that want to get into farming will get into farming.
Would you mind if I asked you for a comment at the microphone in terms of, do you feel the door is as closed as the question came across, that young people can't get into dairy farming in the UK at the moment?
I wouldn't necessarily agree. For some people, they might find it's a better time. There's more opportunity, and I think if they think that they're very good at it, then they should go into it, because I think ultimately the cream will rise to the top. And I think, you know, it's like anything, the best people will be able to succeed in it, and it's going to be very much survival of the fittest. And if they are the best, I think they will be able to succeed in dairy farming. I think that will be the most important variable.
Okay, happy enough. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, if I may, just a slightly different tack. First, and then come on to the fact that I think that the Kidworths are in a very enviable position, frankly, compared with most young people and most young businesses. But the uncomfortable truth is that mother and father have been managing this business for a long time. It has lagged behind what's happened, and they've got 2 sons and a daughter. By the way, there are 3 of them, but the 2 sons, neither of whom are qualified to run this business at this point in time. You know, one of whom is working at £7.20 or £8.50 an hour milking somebody else's cows, and I suspect not involved in the management. And the other, who may have been a very successful insurance executive in London, but has had very little time in the farming business. So could you really expect somebody to come and take a business on with so limited exposure to running a business as opposed to working on a farm? That's I think, an uncomfortable truth for where they are now. But then, you know, this business has got the chance to go in any which direction it chooses. It's got capital, it's got time, it's got the facilities, you know, so there isn't an easier way into farming than where they are at this point in time. The big choice is where they want to go. And again, just one of the other things I'd written down is about timing. And, you know, timing is an area that we should consider as we go through this conversation later on.
Comments, and I come here. Okay. 3 now in my mind, so go quick now, because yeah.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Just a parochial point about aligned contracts and their effect, which I wanted to ask the panel for. But the Competition and Markets Authority, when Muller and Dairycrest got together, were said that it had to be conditional upon effectively a 3rd processor being introduced into the dairy liquid supply market. Now, the person who's been introduced into that market, and all competitors trying to break into the dairy liquid supply market for major retailers, are competing for their milk against aligned contracts. And how does that play out, and is that good for the industry?
Okay, I take it as a question. Just be thinking of it. Just hold that thought. We're going to get the other 2 questions because we're right up in time at the back, and then right here at the front. Yeah.
What the gentleman was saying about who's actually qualified to run the business.
Yeah.
I think if you looked at dairy farms in the UK right now, there'll be 2/3 of them will be qualified. So that's the reality. Yeah. So to say that they're not qualified, well, 2/3 of the industry wouldn't be qualified.
Yeah. So that's a gap that you need to fix as an industry. Yeah, absolutely. And right up the front here now. And if there's any other burning questions, I'll take them, but we're right up to time. Yeah.
Hello, Jonathan Robinson, United Farmers. First of all, I just want to clarify something that the reason I said United Farmers, I should say UK, just so you realise I'm not a plant here from New Zealand. But it's been very interesting listening to all the things that have been said here today. And I'm an ex-dairy farmer from New Zealand, a young dairy farmer that went through the systems and then came across for a holiday 28 years ago. I can confirm I'm not on holiday still, but basically I've worked in the industry over here for many years. Mainly I chose to work out of agriculture or dairy farming here because there was no way into agriculture. You're either born with the luck or you're married into it. Now today, after listening to everything, I've been reflecting back on what I can add, what I can contribute. And it's funny that I'm sitting in New Zealand House, and please don't repeat this outside because I might be considered a traitor. But one of the most important things in farming in New Zealand I learned that was we would take the best aspects, the champions in certain areas who could actually make the farms very profitable, low inputs, high outputs, and actually make the best margins. And we had champion farms in certain areas, and we had groups like the Hive, which would actually be responsible for going around every farm and actually having a look at it. And the farmers there would share how they thought the particular farmer could improve his current situation. Now, if we're really serious, we need to be practical with farming here. Farmers are not exposed to other things that are going on. They're not exposed to the world. They can't see the efficiencies in their competitors. If we're serious, we probably need to look at making champions, farming champions who are doing the right things in the UK regionally, and actually having farmers visit those farms and actually see what they're doing and trying to implement and emulate what they're doing correctly. Thank you.
Jonathan, very clear solution to, and I'll take it as a comment in terms of making farming champions and getting onto their farm. Does anyone want to comment on the parochial question, as he labelled it himself, in terms of the aligned contracts and the third processor entering the game? David, are you close to it, or Pete? Or no, they're all looking at each other. So, you think he knows the answer? He knows the answer. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it at, if there's a burning question, I'll take it. If not, I'll call a halt to the proceedings in terms of this session. We're going to seamlessly move on to the next part of the, but I suppose just to say, as an Irish person listening to the debate this morning and listening to, your leaders for today in terms of the discussion, I mean, honesty, clarity and transparency are so crucial to the success of, or otherwise, of your industry. We come regularly across the water to see what you're doing, and we always talk about the potential, but I mean, unless you're honest, and I think it's come across, I could go down and go through each of the aspects that they've talked about, but I don't think it's necessary. I think they've all talked about benchmarking, honesty, transparency, clarity. Absolute. If you get the benchmarking right, do the right benchmarks, you'll be able to solve it, and you'll be able to measure correctly against it. People skills, again, honesty, transparency, they have to be well trained up, and they have to, know what they're about and what they need to do. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to hand over to James, maybe even, to introduce our next speaker and to take it to the next level. Thanks, James.
suppose just to give you a bit of a background on my involvement here, at the moment Queensland's in the worst drought on record. So so in our area alone, we've got about 600 farms that have been destocked for 3 years. So in terms of cash flow, there's none at all. It's quite the challenge. So initially, we all sort of looked for leadership. So we looked to industry bodies, to government, to actually lead us through the situation, and their resources were just starved, because you just can't. 600 farms. We've done an estimation at the moment, and there's about $1.5 million per farm to restock. So collectively, 600 farms. It's quite a significant amount of money, and it would be interesting to see corporate engagement to try and finance that situation. So now, 3 years on, we've got a notion now. Instead of the power of one and looking to industry leadership, we're looking at each other, and we've got a notion called the power of one times many. So it's sort of the notion of Agrihive as well, because it's up to all individuals to take responsibility and empower their situation. And I believe that's that's what we're here about today, and especially across across the network. We're live streaming, and we're recording the videos, and we're opening up a competition to everyone to actually share their knowledge. So it's about the collective and not the individual. So I think that's an opportunity to flip the way agricultural industries deal with crisis and situation. And when we put this together, I thought it would be great to get somebody from outside of agriculture that's got an affinity and affection for it to actually come and talk about leadership here to us all today and to the greater community. So I'd just like to introduce Dr. Brian Waters. He's a senior lecturer in leadership at Cranfield Defence and Security, Cranfield University. Prior to joining Cranfield, Brian had a very successful and challenging career in the British Army. Having commanded the 1st Battalion, the Cheshire Regiment, he was Director of Military Studies Colonel Training at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, a member of the directing staff at the Joint Services Command and Staff College, Advanced Command and Staff Course. Founding Director of the Ministry of Defence Strategic Leadership Program and Vice President of the Army Officer Selection Board. In direct leadership roles culminating in a 1-star Brigadier's appointment on General Petraeus' staff in Iraq. Brian has commanded on active service in a number of theatres, including Northern Ireland, Rhodesia, Belize, Bosnia, Iraq and Kosovo. His leadership has been formally recognised on 3 occasions. In the UK's Operational Honours and Awards list, and in 2005 he was awarded the Legion of Merit Officer by the United States. So we're tremendously privileged to have Dr. Brian Waters here today, and I'd just like to pass on to him and show your appreciation for him.
Thank you very much. That's an awful lot to live up to. I would just like to begin by saying thank you for what you do. The reason I joined the British Army is the 2 farms my grandparents farmed in Ireland were too small for me to inherit one of them, so I had to go and join the army. And so I've been a frustrated farmer ever since. And I do have an empathy with what you do. And it's a great privilege to speak each year at the Leadership in Agriculture program funded by the Farmers Union down in the West Country. And it was out of that where I met James, and that's why I think I'm here today. I hate standing still, so I'm going to move around a bit. I've been asked to talk about change. And that's one of the things that I specialise in at the university. I run an MSc in leadership for the Ministry of Defence. So the Ministry of Defence pay for 25 serving military and civil servants each year to come and do this master's degree. And I run a strategic leadership program in 19 different countries. Next week I'm in Bangladesh and Burma. I'm going to talk about planning and leading change. I'm going to introduce some ideas. I'm going to introduce some frameworks for analysis that I've used to make sense of contexts that I've been trying to influence or change. And I'm going to share those with you. I've tried to put a dairy spin on a couple of them as a consumer, an admirer, and somebody who looks on with a degree of frustration. As a young officer on a course with the Special Air Service in 1975, every NAFI break, every 11 o'clock in the morning, we went to the NAFI and we drank a pint of cold milk and ate a bun. I put soldiers drinking milk into Google this morning, and I could only find one picture from 1942. And so what's happened to the drinking of milk? We probably now do smoothies and energy drinks, and I'll talk about that. I'd like you to think about the word change for a moment. I'd also like you to think about a problem that you're currently grappling with, and how would you describe that problem? I'm not going to return to that question again, but maybe at the end of my lecture, you might like to reflect on your problem and how you might reframe it as a result of the lecture. It's an emotive word. It intellectually challenges us and it emotionally challenges us. It tends to hit us physiologically and psychologically. Ontology, where words come from, is really important in my line of work. We need to make sure we're all speaking the same language. The word change is fascinating. It comes from that group of people that invaded us in 1066, and its roots are in Latin. It's about altering the state of, and it's about exchange and bartering. That's what change means, exchange and barter. I'm going to talk about some theories and the relevance of theory. Some people don't think theory is relevant. Theory is very relevant when things don't work. But not to worry about theory. When they don't work, we seek answers in theory. This is a guy who was a general in the Prussian army dealing with a catastrophic event. The Prussians, the most powerful army on the planet in the beginning of the 19th century, were beaten by a raggedy-taggedy bunch of Frenchmen led by a little guy. And you can't imagine the global shock of that. And afterwards, Karl von Clausewitz tried to make sense of how a post-revolutionary French army had beaten the most powerful army on the planet, the Prussians. And he spent his life trying to understand it. And after his death, his wife pulled together his thoughts and published them in a book called On War, Vom Krieg. And this is what he talks about theory. It lights up the road. Each of us doesn't come at it from the same position. It educates the mind of the future leader. But you can't take it with you into work. So theory is something that you learn and you practically apply. I want to talk about problems just for a moment. I've been listening to a lot of problems over the last couple of hours, and I got a sense that people were framing problems. They were framing them. The problem of defining problems is knowing what distinguishes an observed condition from a desired condition. So where do we get from where we are to where we want to be? How do we do it? How do we understand the complex causal networks where the trouble really lies? How do we do that? How do we make sense of it? Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, called it phronesis, practical wisdom. How do we get practical wisdom on the farm, in the agricultural industry? How do we understand the simple problem through the complex causal networks? And then how do we get to where we want to be from where we are? And I'm going to introduce something to planners. Has anyone come across tame and wicked problems before as a way of thinking about problems? Yeah? Quite a while ago, and I only wish I'd read it earlier, Rittel and Weber, two planners, Americans. And what they said was that you can think about problems in two ways. One is tame problems, and they're the ones we like. And I've heard lots of tame problems today. And tame problems are really understood as problems that have solutions. You've got to get to the solution, and you know the problem is solved when the problem is solved. You've milked the cows. You've sold the milk. The problem's solved. You need to bridge a gap. You need to dig a drain. You know the problem's solved when it's done. And we like them because we're innately completer finishers as human beings. We love to finish what we do. We love to have a closure. And so we tend to frame problems as tame because then we can deal with them, as opposed to what Rittel and Weber called wicked problems. And wicked problems are the opposite of tame. They're not evil, it's just a rather unfortunate term. It doesn't translate very well into many languages. These are the sort of problems that don't have any solution at all. The price of milk. What is the answer to that problem, the price of milk? There isn't one. There never has been. In my world, I look at things like security. What is the solution to national security? There never has been one. What's the answer to the security of your farm? There never has been an answer to the security of your farm and your equipment. It is a wicked problem. Riddle and Webber in their paper give 10 explanations of a wicked problem. And essentially what they say is a wicked problem is a problem that's connected to another problem that's connected to another problem that's connected to another problem to infinity. Every time you try and tackle the problem, you cause a series of unknown causes and effects. And until ripples of consequence of each action take in part of the problem run its course, you can't understand how it's affected the bigger problem. And we don't like wicked problems for that very reason. So we tend to tame them. So we tame wicked problems. And in so doing, we then ignore the wider wicked. In fact, in their paper, Riddle and Webber argue that it's immoral to try and tame a wicked problem. We should understand the difference, tackle tame problems and solve them, and then manage the bigger wicked problem, like climate change. We just manage the bigger wicked problem. Setting the tax rate, setting subsidies. They're wicked problems. No one's ever come up with a solution. A colleague of mine at Warwick University, Keith Grint, Keith took this as a result of a case study that we talked through together on Bosnia, of all places. And Keith began to look at how you manage, how you handle, how you do the solving of tame and wicked problems. And he said if they're real and objective, then if they're a wicked problem, we must lead them. And by lead, what he meant is we have to build consensus to understand the problem. And so if you take setting the price of milk or the cost of milk production as a wicked problem, it's a problem that's linked to another, linked to another, linked to another, and we heard from James, linked to climate. It's linked to everything. Currency exchange. Loads of variables over which you have no control. Therefore, you have to build as large a group of people as you can find to build consensus, to understand the scope and wickedness of the problem. And you can't govern those people, you can only influence them, because you don't have control or authority over them. So you can't command them, you can't direct them, you can just influence them. And so it's about building a large influence group and that group working together to manage the wicked problem. If it's a tame problem, it can be managed. There is a series of standard operational procedures that somebody knows that will solve the problem. And then he introduced the third type of problem, a crisis, a critical problem. So tame, wicked, and now critical. And a critical problem is a crisis. He said you must identify it as a crisis and deal with it as a crisis. You must command it, you must direct it. Nobody in a crisis wants a committee to deal with the problem. They want a commander, somebody to take charge. This makes the assumption that these problems are real. But we also socially construct problems. We create problems we like to deal with. If we are a natural builder of consensus, we love forming committees to worry about problems. And so we socially construct problems to be wicked. If we like managing problems through procedures, we socially construct them to be tame. If we are innately a commander and we like taking charge and shouting at people, we construct them to be a crisis. I work for lots of people like that. The military attracts them. And so is the problem real or is the problem socially constructed? So we need to make those decisions. I'm now going to look a little bit at context. Do we understand the context in which we're operating? Do we understand the terrain through which we are maneuvering? And so the idea of looking at context provides a structure. It allows then to formulate options and set priorities. This is the sort of thing that we do in international relations and in international security. We generally work about 30 years out. We look at a series of trends, resources, social, political, technological, and economic. We look at the shocks in the near term that are going to influence them and how they go into the probable, the alternative, and the plausible out to 30 years. And this is a piece of work that's constantly done in the Ministry of Defence, and it shares it with all the other ministries. I don't know if you're doing that in agriculture. If you have, and somebody talked about running a business with 5- and 10-year plans, I would think 30-year plans are a minimum. And the further out you go, the more probable rather than plausible they become. So how do we understand then this terrain, the internal and the external environment? I gave it a bit of thought on Google Images. 1998 Google was invented. What did we do before 1998? It was a real puzzle. My children don't know. I remember used to get a book. But now I use Google Images, very powerful. And so I was thinking, well, what is the environment that the dairy industry is operating in? When I went to the NAFI in 1975, none of this stuff existed. How on earth do people pay good money for water in fancy bottles? How has somebody managed to convince us to do that? I was in a restaurant the other day and they were drinking this stuff. And it was £2 a bottle for water. Both my children drink this stuff. Soya and almond. They're not allergic to anything. It's trendy. It's fashionable. Smoothies. These things here. When I was colonel training at Sandhurst, one of our cadets died on a run. He drank 2 litres of that before he did his run. It takes 2 litres of bodily seminal fluid to digest 1 can of that drink. And he dehydrated and died. I banned it. I ended up on page 3 of The Sun, not the topless one, but because I banned that drink from Sandhurst. Apparently I wasn't allowed to. This stuff here, I quite enjoy gin and tonic. How on earth has this industry transformed this stuff into this stuff? And you're paying £45 for 70 centilitres of gin in a fancy bottle. It's still gin. But how have they done it? I don't know. But they have. But all that's happened here is that's gone to that. So what on earth are you doing about it? Why aren't you doing more of this? You know, I just had some thoughts saying single farm milk. That's like Hilden water, isn't it? Single source milk. Must be great because it's a single source from a known herd, from a known farmer. Must be worth paying £5 a litre for, like you do for water. Single breed milk, Cheshire milk, because I grew up with dairy farming boys from Cheshire. Devon milk. I've got a mate who's a farmer in Devon. I don't see any of that. All I see is this. And it's not even ecologically sound. I mean, we should be being made to pay more for plastic bottles like we now are for plastic bags, because they're bad for the environment. But you put your milk in these bad for the environment containers. Why? They're bad for the environment. My wife loathes them. She says they leak in her shopping. So I don't know where we've gone. 1975, a pint of cold milk every NAFI break, every working day of the week. And I loved it. I can't get a pint of cold milk to save my life in the NAFI now. I can get all sorts of frappuccinos and things. So that was the only picture I could find of soldiers drinking milk. 1942. So there's something strange going on. And what's going on is something that the business schools, when I teach on our MBA, is one of my favorite tools. I use this to convince my general in Iraq that we were facing strategic failure. I simply use this model. It's very powerful. Amount of change over time. That's the external environmental rate of change. That's your smoothies, your bottled waters, your funny nut milk. It's market forces, it's government policies, it's EU policies, it's weather trends, it's everything. And then we tend to incrementally change. We tend to incrementally change. And so every little rest from change, because we can't change all the time, can we? Because we need to rest from change. So every rest from change, we fall 1 unit further behind the environmental rate of change, because the external rate of change doesn't stop. It keeps going. So while we take a rest from change, it doesn't. And so we fall behind. And it doesn't matter what your business, your industry, or your ministry is, you fall behind the external rate of change. This is what research shows us. And then we reach a crisis point where we enter what is called a state of flux. And these are when we do short, sharp changes of change. It's not working, we'll change again. That isn't working, we're going to change again. And we get into a bit of a crisis. And as we're doing that, we get further and further and further away from the external rate of change, putting milk into plastic bottles. And then we reach a crisis. And in the crisis, we've got to do one of two things. We've either got to do what they call a step change to get back up to where the market is, or we face annihilation. Really clever organizations avoid this trap. And what they do is, sensing weak signals in the market, they innovate and get ahead of the market. Take the iPad. I mean, I've seen a few being used at the moment. What on earth is an iPad? When did we discover we needed an iPad? We didn't. But Jobs knew we needed an iPad. And his design team knew we needed an iPad. So they developed an iPad and they marketed it, and my wife has to have two. One that can fit in a handbag for some reason. GE, General Electric, years ago, got out of white goods, got into banking, computers, jet engines, at a time when they were making billions of dollars out of white goods. Because Jack Walsh saw weak signals in the Middle Eastern market. He saw that the Middle East was going to start, the Far East, was going to start producing white goods, fridges, freezers, and washing machines, cheaper than GE could, to the same quality. And whilst the Americans are very loyal, they're not going to pay twice the price for their white goods when the reliability is the same. So he got out of it. And he had the finance within GE to be able to undertake the transition. And GE are transitioning again as we speak. And so I don't know, where are the weak signals in your industry that allow preemptive innovation? Or are we going to wait until we get to the crisis before we are driven to change, like a mobile phone company called Nokia? Burning platform memo, just put it into Google. It was a memo sent out by the CEO of Nokia telling his entire company that if they didn't change, if they didn't stop resisting the move to this new style of mobile phone, the company would cease to exist. It was a crisis. So they had to do a step change. A very powerful, very simple model. You might think about using it. And so I'm sure you've come across some of these tools before, the business school tools to understand the external and internal environment. Things like PESTLE, things like SWOT analysis, and risk maps. So having understood the external environment, and we realize we have to change to keep pace with it, how do we change? It's about people, and we've heard a lot about that this morning. I like to say you lead people through change and you manage the process of change. You've got to get both right. You can be a beautifully charismatic, confidence-building leader with lousy processes and your change will fail. You can be a brilliant master of the Gantt chart and lousy people skills, not convince the people to change, and the change won't happen. That's what research tells us. So it's about context, culture, and process. But most of all, it's about people. And you know people don't look like that at all. They're not in serried rows, easily understood. They don't live in organograms where everything is neat and tidy. People are just people. And they're all muddled, they're interrelated. You make a change in this part of the organization, you think that's isolated in that part of the organization, but it isn't, because somebody's married to somebody in this part of the organization, and it upsets that part of the organization. And so it's about understanding people. Also, change, research shows us, happens simultaneously across every level, from the environment to the individual. And when you're dealing with individuals, you're dealing with their physiology as well as their psychology. We are physiologically programmed not to want to change. We don't like it. Our brain doesn't like change. The most horrendous example of that was when I was working in counter-terrorism in Northern Ireland in the mid-80s. And the Irish Republican Army were targeting critical key people that were involved in building a process towards an accommodation. And so we contacted these critical key people and showed them how to stay alive and defeat the IRA's assassination attempts. It meant living random lives. And people don't like living random lives. And by random, I mean you had 2 dice. The first roll of the dice is what time you left your house. The second roll of the dice is what route you took to work. 6 permeables times 6. Can you imagine living your life like that? Never knowing when you went to bed what time you were getting up until you rolled the dice just before you went to sleep? It lasted for most people about 3 weeks, and then they went back to their routine and they were assassinated. Because the IRA simply got inside their routine and knew they could place them in time and space somewhere to kill them. So people knew that they ran the risk of dying, but they still couldn't cope with living a random life. We just don't like change. The brain convinces us. I mean, think about your morning routine. How often do you actually change it? We don't. We live routines. Our brain programs us to, because our brain then has spare capacity to do what it needs to do, which is to scan to stay alive, looking for lions and tigers, which is how we are primitively programmed. The cynicism of change is not new. Gaius Petronius, during the time of Nero, a few thousand years ago, said that. He was a soldier, fought the Egyptians, and then was a politician, a senator. And so when involved in change, you've got to overcome the cynicism of change. McKinsey say 70% of change fails to happen. Why does it fail to happen? It fails to happen because people don't overcome cynicism and fear. The lack of applied knowledge. People don't have the knowledge to undertake the change. They don't have the new skills required to undertake the change. Hidden conflicts that undermine your efforts. I've only got 1 year to go. I retire. There's no way I'm changing. If anyone thinks I'm leaving my corner office, it took me 25 years to negotiate, they've got another thing coming. And so there are all sorts of strange counter-change terrorists at work. And then unwritten rules that work against change. It's not the way we do things around here. It's called culture. So implies criticism. We have to change the dairy industry because you're all crap farmers. Sorry about that, but it's just one of those unpalatable truths. Yeah, well, we don't like that. Sod off, Waters. We're not going to listen to you anymore. It implies personal criticism. It changes power and status. It affects job security. Do I have a job in this new structure? It introduces risk. We don't do it like that. I moved into our Joint Services Command and Staff College as a directing staff at the age of 45. Up until that stage, I didn't know what a keyboard was. I moved into a paperless staff college where everything was done on the intranet. I didn't even know what an intranet was. So at the age of 45, I had to learn to type. It was a very painful process. Involved an awful lot of risk. Involved an awful lot of problems with my status, my position, and my sense of self. I just finished being a battalion commander. I was responsible for 650 people for 2 years in Northern Ireland on counter-terrorist operations. I was quite good at my job. No, I wasn't. I was crap because I couldn't type. That was a real change. And we don't like it. And shall I go or shall I knuckle down and learn to type? It was a long, slow process. I still use 2 fingers. Rejection of ideas from outside. Consultants. We bring in consultants because we want a fresh set of eyes. But we like consultants because their ideas are easy to reject because they're not our ideas. And all they're doing anyway is borrowing our watch to tell us the time. Speed of change. It's too fast. Slow it down. We can't cope. What about the external rate of change? It's not slowing down. Doesn't matter. We need a stop. We need to gather ourselves. We're not logical. We're not rational actors. We're emotional beings. That's the way we're constructed. And psychologists have even come up with a term for this. They call it the status quo bias. We like things the way they are. And if you just think about it, we do. We like things the way they are. We're comfortable. We're secure. Sorry, you'd have to be a 1980s person to get my slight cynicism there. So why do we need to change? We've either sensed signals or we're in a crisis. Kurt Lewin, 1947, the father of change theories. His was the first theory of change. A very simple three-stage step. Use the analogy of water and ice. He said you can't move ice very easily. You've got to melt it into water. Then it flows around all the obstacles. So the first thing you've got to do is unfreeze. You've then got to change, and you then freeze, because we can't cope with staying in change, and we recognize that. And so unfreezing, overcoming inertia, overcoming systems, overcoming the existing mindset. Remember, it's partly process, partly people. And for people, it's a mental attitude. You've got to overcome the mindset that change isn't necessary. And having done that, you do a very quick piece of analysis. Force field analysis is what he called it. You look at the forces for change, and you look at the forces resisting change, in a very objective, sometimes your external consultants in. Come and have a look at us, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Tell us if we're ready to change or not. And they objectively tell you. And if you're not ready to change, don't bother, because it won't happen. So you've got to wait for the forces resisting change. He then said you change. It's a horrible, messy process. It's not linear. It's not logical. It's emotional, and it's awful. And as long as you're prepared for that, you'll be fine. And then afterwards, we consolidate the new processes, bring the new mindset into place, and get ready for the next round of change. But before you begin to change, you've got to know where you are. It's a simple navigational point. If you're going to go from A to B, it's all very well known where B is that you're going to, but if you're not setting off from a known point, you're never going to get there. So if you want to really understand an organization, try and change it. Things will come and bite you that you didn't understand. And McKinsey's 7S model, Peace and Waterman, is one of the sort of standard business school models for understanding an organization. And then you'll understand that if you change a system, what's its impact on the skills required and the staff and the style of leadership through the shared values and eventually the structure. But I'm only changing one system. No, that one system will impact on everything else in the organization. And unless you can track it and follow it and understand the cause and effect of your change, then your change will be derailed, because you'll be derailed by things you didn't understand. When we were in Iraq, and I was tasked with initially the tame problem of reforming Iraq's police force in 1995. That's what we thought the problem was, reforming Iraq's police force. That wasn't the problem at all. That was the tame problem. The wicked problem was reforming its Ministry of Interior. And that really was a wicked problem in both senses of the word. And I used Kotter's 8-step model, and it really does work. And what Kotter did is he took Lewin's 3 steps, and through about 30 years of research with his PhD students at Harvard University, he reverse engineered a model of change. And so the things that went wrong with change, he then put in as the steps of change, because you're putting in steps to address what goes wrong. He reckoned 85% of change fails to achieve all their objectives. And these are his 8 steps. He says the first thing is establish a sense of urgency. There's got to be a reason for change. What is it? Why are we changing? Don't know. You know, it's like new person, we change. No, people have to buy into it. You have to establish a sense of urgency. If you don't change, you don't have a job. That's good. Let's change. Form a powerful guiding coalition from across the structure. From the youngest, newest entrant through the go-to person, Jenny, who's in accounts, who everyone goes to find something out because she's been there for donkey's years, knows everything. If you ignore Jenny in the change process, your process is doomed. So form a guiding, powerful coalition. Then create a vision. If you create a vision at the beginning, it's only an illusion. It's a mirage, because no one will believe it, because there isn't a sense of urgency for change, and you haven't embedded a powerful guiding coalition to talk up the need for change and to support the vision. So the vision becomes a joke. And so after the vision, communicate, communicate, communicate. And communicate appropriately. Empower others to act on the vision. So you're empowering the guiding coalition to act on the vision. You are distributing the leadership responsibility. You cannot drive change from the top. Change must be driven from across the organization, so people right across the organization must be empowered to change. Plan for and create short-term wins. On 30th of January 1990, no, I'm in the wrong country, 2005, get my date right. 30th of January 2005, Iraq had its first ever free and fair elections. They'd never had elections before. We ruled the country until 1958. We never gave them elections. And then they took over and they didn't give themselves elections because they just had a series of tyrants. And so, first ever election in the country. The Ministry of Interior and Iraq's police force would be front and center for managing the security of Iraq's first free election. That was a bit of a tall order because when we took over the Ministry of Interior 3 months earlier, the only people they could communicate with was Baghdad. They couldn't communicate with the rest of Iraq, with its 17 other provinces. And so we had a bit of work to do. We had to create the conditions that would enable the demonstration that the Ministry of Interior and the police had changed and could manage the security of the elections. There was half the American army just outside the polling booths with its 4 policemen, but it was the policemen the people saw when they dipped their finger in the purple ink and waved it to the media that they've voted. Democracy isn't always the answer we later discovered, but anyway. Constitutionalise improvements and produce still more change. Institutionalise the approaches, and then go back to the beginning again, because it won't be long before you're having to keep up with the external rate of change. It really does work. It gives you a structure, and we like structures. We can peg things on them. And if you look, you can see the 3 areas of Lewin: the unfreeze, the change, and the freeze. I mentioned this earlier. If you're not familiar with this tool, it is terribly powerful. In 2008, I was Commander of British Forces Kosovo. It transitioned from being a province of Serbia to a nation state, then the world's latest nation state, courtesy of American requirements. And we sat down and we looked at Kosovo as a nation state in terms of its internal and external security. And we used this framework, the SWOT analysis. Each of the boxes had between 130 and 250 bullets. We then worked out a system to link the bullets, so we numbered them 1 to 135, 1 to 147. And 1 would equal 1 and 5 would equal 5 in each of them. And you end up with a really powerful structure of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Internal strengths and weaknesses, external opportunities and threats. And it really works very well. I commend it to you. People. How do you lead them through change? A point James talked about, leading people through change. This is as good a curve I've ever come across. It's based on the grievance curve. Fisher developed it. It begins with the event of change and the initial anxiety, and that goes through either to denial, it ain't going to happen, or happiness. Always told you this place should change. Haven't I for years around the water fountain? Always me. I've always said it should change. And then immediate fear. Oh my gosh, we are changing after all. Talking about it's one thing, doing it is another. Do I have a job? And so we go through fear. A threat. Everything's a threat. Everything's a threat to me. I'm a threat to everything else in this new change, because I don't quite know what the end state of this change will be. Now suddenly guilt. I'm going to survive, but my best friend is going to be made redundant, and his whole department is going up the Swanee, and I feel awful. I've got survivor guilt. I then go, oh, well, not too bad, he's got a good settlement. And I go through gradual acceptance and I move forward. Or I go into deep depression and I become an anti-change terrorist. Now, if you're a leader, if you're a manager of an organization undergoing change, you will go through that as well, up to here, and you might do it in 5 minutes. It's okay. But what about your team? What about those 3 or 4 levels down in the organization? How are they feeling? Do you understand them? Do you know Jenny in accounts? Is she in happiness, fear, threat, guilt? Has she gone into depression? Do we need to pull her out of depression and get her back up on gradual acceptance? Has anyone told her she's still got a job? Are we communicating? And so everybody will go through this curve at a different rate. And so you've got to lead your people through the change curve. And so how do we make this change? Well, we have to have a strategy. And we start with a strategy of where we are, which is normally where we don't want to be. That's Mordor. And then we go to what Churchill eloquently described as the sunlit uplands, which is a brilliant vision for the future because it's not too specific. And then we have a strategy to achieve the change. And that's so simple. It's a straight line from where you are to where you want to be. And then you get on with it. And you march down the road of change to the sunlit uplands. And it's all about the end where you want to go, the way to get there, and the means to facilitate the way to the end. But of course, it's not really like that. You know where you want to be, you've worked out where you are, and you come up with an idea of how you're going to get there. And you have an intended strategy. And this is a piece of work I said Mintzberg. Henry Mintzberg is probably the guy who deserves the credit for it. And he called this emergent strategy because the previous model was a deliberate strategy. We know what we're going to do. We never know what's going to happen tomorrow. There are so many variables we don't control. We don't control currency rates. We don't control climate. We don't control government elections. We don't control EU policy. There are lots of things we don't control that are going to knock our strategy off. So we've got to be able to, what I love to describe as surf the wave of chaos, which is the route. And so we begin with an intended strategy, which we develop into our deliberate strategy. I worked for a year with the Americans as a planner, and they love deliberate strategy. They're masters of it, and they can eloquently show it in PowerPoint. And what they don't like is when it doesn't work, because you can't control the future. And in Iraq, we could not control the insurgency. We could not control Iran's intent. We couldn't control the fact that if we are going to introduce a democracy and there are 60% Shia loyal to Iran and there are 40% Sunni loyal to themselves, the Shia are going to rule the Sunni. The Sunni had ruled the Shia for the preceding 50 years because we empowered the Sunni to govern the Shia because we couldn't govern them when we ran the country. And so the empire struck back in the form of Iran. And democracy created an Iran-focused government of Iraq, which screwed all our plans. And so we ended up with an unrealized strategy. And we then had to work through the emergent strategy in order to deliver a realized strategy. And if you look at the recent history of Iraq and current events there, you'll know we're still a long way off. And the realized strategy has re-emerged into the emergent strategy, and that's where we are at the moment. We still think we know where we want to be, which was the original vision for Iraq, which was a nation at peace with itself and a force for good in the region. That's a sunlit upland. Identity and culture, coming to an end now. I said earlier, the thing that will most derail change is the way we do things around here, and you're not changing those, and that's called culture. There's a sign in the boardroom of the Ford works in Detroit, the boardroom in Detroit of the Ford Motor Company, which says, culture will eat your strategy for breakfast. That's why you haven't seen as many Fords on the road as you used to, because Ford thought from a small boardroom in Detroit they could run a global industry and impose Fordism on every culture in the world. It didn't work in Dagenham. And so what is culture? It's what we do. It's the norms of our society. But it's only good for us. It isn't good for anyone else. And Ed Schein talked about it on 3 levels. Artifacts, the outward manifestations. Espouse values, what people say about the way things are supposed to be. And finally, the bedrock, the basic assumptions. In a change program, it's quite easy to change artifacts. With negotiation, it's quite easy to change espouse values, but you mess with people's basic assumptions and they'll have none of it. They'll leave. They'll find a job somewhere else because you've crossed a line. And so if you haven't mapped, as part of knowing where you are at the beginning, what your organization's artifacts, values, and basic assumptions are, then you can't invoke a change program. Because if you mistake an artifact for a basic assumption, you derail the change program. Take, for example, a flag. Now, the Union flag, or Jack, is that an artifact, an espoused value, or a basic assumption, do you think? Where is it in your heart? the Union Jack. We were about to lose the blue bits a while ago, weren't we? When our friends in the north were going on their own. Stayed by a narrow margin. So we'd have lost the blue bits to the flag. Would that have impacted hugely on the flag? So, what do you think about the Union flag? Is an artifact a spouse value or a basic assumption? Artifact. I think it probably is an artifact. When I worked with the Americans, I discovered that Old Glory is not an artifact. Old Glory is a basic assumption. Mess with Old Glory, the flag of the United States of America, and you're just dead. They revere their flag in a way that we just don't. And so we have two different cultural approaches to a simple thing like a flag by two countries divided by our common language. And that's the end. As I said, I wasn't going to solve your problems. I'm just giving you some frameworks that you might like to reframe that problem you thought about right at the beginning of the lecture. And now, is it a tame problem, a wicked problem, or a critical problem? Only you know.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Yes? Oh, you can hear me. If there was ever a reason why we're live streaming this, that is the reason, because I certainly want to watch that again. If there's any session at all you want to watch today again, that would be the one, I think. That was absolutely fascinating. Now, part of the plan was that there would be a reasonably in-depth summing up now. We're quite tight for time. So with that in mind, really, I mean, we can't really do it justice today to sort of try and sum it up in 2 or 3 minutes. I know one or two of you are quite keen to get away. Now, please have a look at this on the way out, this illustration that's been going on. We will take pictures of this, and it will appear up on the Agrihive website in due course. I'll hand over to my Agrihive team members if they've got anything to add before I sort of do a final wrapping up and thanking at the end.
As ever, very quiet, and those that know me will be very unusual. I want to say James started Agrihive as a team of 1. We became a team of 5. I am really hoping we are now a team of 80 to 100. We need you to help drive and develop this change. We need you to start talking reality and truth to our farmers. Stop skirting around the issues. We need to be hard. It's like being a tough parent with my kids. I can't tell them when they're fantastic, when actually, truthfully, they could be a damn sight better. But when they are fantastic, I will tell them it. I can't joke and say, I'm going to be a size 10 if I keep eating all the pies and I keep having that 2nd and 3rd and 5th wine glass. We have to be reality. If farmers are going to be lifestyle farmers, they just want to be their own manager, their own boss, and they just want an average living, they're not going to change. That's fine. But if they really do want to get forward and they do want to survive, we have to make sure we give them those right tools and we don't take any crap. We have to come forward and we have to be strong, and that's why we're asking you. We've been delighted at the support we've had by our sponsors. We've been delighted by the backing we've had from our speakers. We've been amazed by everybody saying, thank God somebody is having the balls to speak about this and be honest. But it does not stop in this room. And I think what Brian has said, when we're taking leadership forward and trying to drive our troops and develop change, we need you to back us. This does not finish here. It's going to go at the next stage. We need to help Heather and Robert get through this family transition that they're going through. We need to help their sons and daughters, because this is my brother, this is my sister, it could be my father. We all know these families. But this is our responsibility. This competition is opening up nationally. We've already had some really good feedback and industry and answers and suggestions coming forward. But when we get these competitions forward, which is some fantastic prizes, thank you, James has been incredible. We've got flights to Australia. We've got gifts and surprises and things coming in from Mull Valley. We've got a whole heap of stuff coming forward, and there's 3 categories for the competition. But we need you guys, but then we're going to need more funding. Today hasn't just happened. It's been quite hard, and we've had some wobbles, but we've been delighted by the support of the companies that have really put the money in the pocket and helped us. We are just 5 individuals who've done this off our own bat. But we can't drive that change without you backing us, and we will need money to make that happen for the next stages. So we really do want to help that. So please come forward. And yeah, any more of my colleagues going to say some more words?
I don't have a lot to say really. Just thanks everyone for coming and for sharing and hopefully contributing and getting something out of it. I think one of the key messages I think that has come out certainly from some of the thoughts that were put forward this morning and then from the discussion this afternoon is that we need to be a lot more open, and we need openness between farmers and processors in terms of sending the right messages and controlling what people are doing. We need openness within families so that farmers talk amongst themselves and sort out a lot of these big issues and hit things. We probably need openness between industry bodies and farmers as to exactly where they're at and what they need to be working towards. And I think, you know, that will drive some of this change. And I think, unfortunately, as Brian alluded to, I can't remember exactly what it was on his curve about how you change and you need a rest. You know, sooner or later, we all have to do it. We probably are getting to that point where we've got a crisis if we're not careful, and everyone will be going through a lot of quite hard, tough decision making. But if everybody within families, on farms, and the associated communities around them are more open about what we need to deliver, hopefully we can see some of these businesses through to a thriving future.
Great. Thanks, Rob. David? As long as we've got time, and Brian's all right with that.
Yep. Are you familiar with the Kidworth scenario? Who might be best placed, either within the family or outside the family, to instigate change? Because what the end result could look like is pretty rosy, but it's getting from A to B, isn't it? And who or what is best placed to instigate that change and follow through?
I have to.
I've got one here. I like the idea of the New Zealand model the gentleman mentioned earlier, where you have some thought leaders
who are masters or mistresses of best practice, who can come along and guide people, explain to them why they need to change, and then maybe share with them how they do the changing. And I don't see any member of the family likely to do it. I think it will probably be externally. In the current model I saw, it's probably the bank manager, but I prefer the idea of the champion coming in and saying, you know, you're a great family, you're a super pair of farmers, but this ain't going to work. And I think that the question of, you know, how is mum and dad going to live when they've transitioned the farm, on what are they going to live, and is the farm going to have to provide at least a retirement income as well as a working income? And that's certainly some of my friends who are farmers is one of the things they're facing now, because mum and dad didn't save. And so I think it probably needs to be externally driven, because I doubt if the family understand the crisis enough because of their status quo bias.
Okay, any more questions for Brian? Great, we're done. Right, well, just one very quick thing. Philippa is around for a little bit longer if anybody isn't rushing away. We could still do some more one-to-one interviews with Philippa. I would just like to say a huge thank you to all our speakers who took part today. You know, we couldn't have done this without you and given up your time and your expertise. I think we've had a cracking day, and I do get the sense that this is just the beginning of something. But two really special thank yous to Jack and to Philippa. Philippa hadn't met any of us until she walked in this morning, and I think you'd agree with me, she did an absolutely tremendous job of running this morning's session. And Jack, I've known Jack best part of 10, maybe 12 years. The first time I met Jack, he was like a terrier with his teeth into us all, so he was ideally placed really to run that session this afternoon. And another thank you to this young guy at the back here who jumped on a plane somewhere in Australia a few days ago to come here and direct us through today, as well as coming up with the idea in the first place. I think we've got a huge thank you to James really for coming here and helping us along with today. So, and thank you to all of you. You know, this wouldn't have happened without you, and here's to meeting again sometime. And the sponsors, as Heather said before. Thank you.